Swami Vishnu-devananda and his experiments of science. He was ahead of his time in using science to explain yoga. This was recorded at the 50th anniversary of the Shivananda Yoga Camp.
I would like to know about Swamiji's scientific experiments. I've heard he did something, but never really into detail.
Well, actually, both Swami Vishnu-devananda and I was involved with the lab for about 3 years, and Swami Vishnu-devananda was one of the main guinea pigs. So, Swamiji was really fascinated. Well, he was very fascinated by science, but not only that, he wanted to prove to people the benefits of yoga using a language that Western people could understand, and our main religion here is science. So we, our doctors are our priests, and so Swamiji did a lot of different experiments. The first experiments that he started doing experiments with plants and playing music and seeing how the plants would react to different types of music. If they would, if you play like violent music, the plants were not happy, and they would die. And then he started using and played good music, and the music the plants would react to the music. And he got a lie detector. What do you call a lie detector machine?
Lie detector. And he hooked up to the plants.
Hooked up to the plants, and they start hooking up to well, basically, there are different physiological reactions that are used to be able to tell if somebody is telling the truth or not. So hook a person up to their breathing and their heartbeat, and certain waves are polygraph, basically, is what it's called. So he started to do experiments just to see how, and this was like a very primitive form of biofeedback for meditation, to show how people the minds would calm down with meditation, with pranayama. And then in
he used to put the plants here, I remember one morning, to see how it would react. Actually, they used to have the
chanting.
Yeah, the chanting. When we first came in, the plants were put at night. They signal kind of panic, and people come in noise, this and that and that and that. Then was silent meditation. It was very peaceful. And then we started chanting, and immediately showed a great joy. And remember the first time that the astronaut landed on the moon, we were at Swamiji's house in the Orange House, and the plants were hooked up right here where the two statues of Swami Shivananda and Swami Vishnu are. Behind was a little kind of tool room. So we put the plants there, we hooked them up. And when the first man Armstrong put the foot on the moon, it was a great joy, jumping around. Okay? So he did a lot of experimentation, actually called Dr. Baxter, which was one of the inventors of the contribution to the lie detector. He told us stories about plants and that, so many, things went on at that time. It was the first time we had some experimentation on plants, saying that plants, for instance, at random, from a computer, he would drop a live crabs in hot boiling water. It would be instant death. And the plants were far away, isolated. So at random, the computer would drop the crab on the hot water. Each time, on a split of a second, the plant used to react. Okay? So to say there are no stupid plants, but of darkness within they are, They have emotion, they have feelings, they have joy or happiness, fear, like any one of us. Okay. And an experiment they did, they gave about 15 or 30 plants to half of a high school class, and we were told, treat these plants as plants. Same number of plants. To another group of the same class, say, treat these plants as your friend. Talk to them with love. So they came back after 3-4 months. There was a great difference of growth between the plants which are being treated as plants which are being treated like human beings. So a lot of experimentation was done at that time. That was the first time actually. But he used to do a lot of gadget inside himself. He used to buy these chemicals, you know, children. He used to play around his house all the time.
And then in the mid-late 70s, Swamiji wanted to show psychic phenomena. At least, I don't know how long he was working with Marilyn Rossler and also with her husband, Professor John Rossler. And they were doing, when did you start doing the symposiums?
Oh, I started the symposiums in Nassau in 1975. 76.
76. So it was around 76, 77, and he did a tour around. Actually, when I first met Swamiji, we went down for a psychic symposium in New York from the campus with Marcel Vogel and
Lawrence O'Shawn.
Yeah. So they were actually touring with Marilyn and John and the forefront and also the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who also was doing psychic experiments when he was going to the moon. So Swamiji what he was trying to show was physiologically and also to prove that psychic phenomena, so that people wouldn't just see that the world is physical, but that most of what we're dealing with is on a psychic level. And even the asanas that we're doing, 90% of what you're doing with asanas is really on psychic. Communication, when we're communicating with each other, most of our communication is psychic and not even verbal. But all of this, so Swamiji had a great interest in this, and I don't know, maybe Marilyn could speak a little bit.
I was with him. He was
Use the mic. Marilyn, use the mic, please. You have a mic there?
Yeah.
Swamiji was also doing a tremendous amount of research in the former Soviet Union. He was working with the scientists in the laboratory to show the effect of the breath on certain kinds of physical conditions.
I can't hear you. We have to speak louder.
Swamiji was also doing a tremendous amount of research with some of the scientists and medical doctors in the former Soviet Union.
Especially in Prague.
Especially in Prague, but also actually in what was at that time Russia. And he was at that time, he was working with Dr. Krennikov, etc. And they were doing the physical asanas and showing the effect of that in the psychiatric units. Swamiji also was working with different scientists, especially with the breath, and not only in Prague, but also in Poland as well. So in the former Soviet Union, they were extremely interested in this phenomena. Actually, in one place, it was in Russia, that we had the opportunity to meet a woman. Her name was Juna. She was considered to be the greatest medium psychic of Russia, and Swamiji worked with her as well. And he was always interested in understanding things in a scientific way. He was really the forerunner. I mean, he was the forerunner of everything that we see now. You know, the first TTC, the first children's camp. I mean, he was the one who brought people together from every religion, every philosophy, every walk of life.
I guess it was in the mid 80s, about 1986, 87. He started to bring, I get the Ukrainian doctors first. He brought Pentecost, and started, and he would give everybody TTC and had the doctors taking yoga teachers training course, and then actually some of them actually started yoga centers when they went back. And then he brought the doctors from Prague. There was a group of doctors, and again during the former Soviet times, the research was not so much about money, but they could really do research, pure research, and they had been working with the Swamiji. What's the name of the group in Bombay? The research.
Vishnu-devananda Kendra.
No, the other one. Yeah. Kavalyam. Yeah. So that, and they had been working. The research that had been done in India in the mid 1900s or early, and they had done all kinds of X-rays. So they had researched all of the yoga research that had been done on the asanas and the pranayama, and then they were taking it a step further, and they were working with modern EEG, EKG machines, and actually Swamiji brought in the state-of-the-art computers at the time for doing EEG. The machine was $120,000 when you bring it across the border. It was a whole adventure as well. And the stone house was a laboratory.
He also did a tremendous research in psychiatry. He would go to what was at that time the Douglas Hospital, the largest psychiatric hospital, and he would offer yoga first to the doctors and nurses. And we had about 300 doctors and nurses taking yoga. It was the first time this was ever done in North America. And then some of these exercises, the 12 basic postures and some of the basic pranayama, was offered to the inmates in the hospital. But so he was the first one who went into the psychiatric units.
And then when Swamiji did the first sadhana intensive, people were asking, what was the sadhana that you did when you were raising Kundalini, when you were in the Himalayas? And he decided to share it with everyone. And so one summer, he spent the whole summer teaching about pranayama, and Swami Srupananda and Swami Sukadevananda were the two main. I mean, there were other people who were doing studies on the Swamiji, who were showing the pranayamas, which is why Swami Srupananda has been teaching the sadhana intensive, because he was given instruction directly from Swamiji on the pranayamas to do for the both for the sadhana intensive and also for the lab. So Swamiji spent many hours with us in the lab and hooked up to all the machines, and just to show the physiological changes and the brain changes. And there were some quite amazing results that came out of it. One of the results was in the Kapalabhati, was the stimulation of the olfactory nerve of the brain, which is a very ancient part of the brain, which helps to regulate the ancient part of the brain when you practice your Kapalabhati. We also actually Swamiji himself was a guinea pig, and he sat for meditation for us, and we had him hooked up. And all of you hear about alpha waves, delta waves in meditation. When Swamiji did his meditation, the alpha waves were very, very high, the beta waves were at the very, very high, the delta waves were very, very high. So it was in every aspect of it was a total activation of the brain from a EEG perspective. He also took all of this equipment to India. We had this $120,000 machine. We had to bring it into India. Actually, Prahlad was when I first got to work with Prahlad, and we spent a couple of weeks getting the equipment through the customs in Bombay and all of that. It was also quite an adventure. But anyway, maybe Swamiji can speak a little bit about the experiments that he did, Swamiji.
Swamiji did many types of researches in relation of yoga and science. Before I speak about the experiments regarding Hatha Yoga and meditation, I want to mention a few other things which are well known. Swamiji was very much interested in the research of Dr. Motoyama from Japan on the subject of the chakras, the energy centers. Dr. Motoyama developed a machine that could measure the activity of the chakras, and Swamiji purchased that machine, and it was at Swamiji's house. He worked with that chakra measuring machine. It was a large machine. He was very much interested into it. Swamiji also was interested in Krillian photography, photographing the aura, and he brought an expert from India on the Krillian photography, and the expert tested a whole group of TTC. At that time it was a very large TTC, over 100 people, before the TTC, during the TTC, after the TTC, and there were major differences in the aura measurements. Also, the doctor was able to predict diseases through analysis of the aura, and again it was visible that certain diseases that developed already on the subtle level disappeared at the end of the TTC. It was demonstrated. So he was also interested in this. And also he used the same equipment as Srinivasan said in order to measure the energy of the participants of the kavadi. And while the person was dancing with 108 spears in his body, in ecstasy, the measurement equipment showed that all the electrical waves in the brain were at their highest amplitude. So the alpha, the beta, the theta, and the delta simultaneously. The whole brain was on fire. And
the same as his meditation, actually. When we did the research of him in the lab doing meditation.
So he did this also. Now regarding the lab, Swamiji connected with an institute which was affiliated to the University of Prague. It was called the Institute for the Research of Human Physiology. And that institute specialized in the research of yoga practices. Swamiji met them in Prague, and he built a laboratory here in the ashram. It was in the stone house, and he brought the researchers in the stone house. And he brought the researchers, and they came, and for 2 years they conducted research regarding Hatha Yoga. And then for the 3rd year they conducted research regarding meditation. And I was one of the guinea pigs there, as Srinivasa mentioned. I was a guinea pig in the Hatha Yoga experiments. I was fortunate to be guided closely by Swamiji during that period. I had to go through all the intense Hatha Yoga practices, being hooked to all of these machines, and there were some good results. And then I was also involved in the experiments regarding meditation in the 3rd year. Then Swamiji ended these experiments. I also want to mention another thing that Swamiji did.
he experimented with the effect of electromagnetic fields, magnetobiology. He brought here Dr. Shankar Narayan, and in the stone house he built a whole lab. And this lab was a lab which was able to produce any type of electromagnetic field. They built a huge machine. The person would sit in the machine and different electromagnetic fields were created, and then
they were micro. It was not like a high energy. I mean, it was done on a very, very subtle level.
And the research was to see how these electromagnetic fields are affecting the human body, the human mind, healing, and so on. Swamiji followed this research also with great interest. And so, as you all heard, Swamiji was involved almost in any and every field of science. Also, he was one of the first ones to expose the audience that was here in the ashram to the effect of electromagnetic fields on our body. He brought in the author of the book, The Body Electric. It's one of the most famous works on the effect of electromagnetic fields on the human body. He brought a person here and to describe to the people how the electromagnetic fields are affecting us. And he did it many years back. And he was even involved in things which were considered controversial. For example, one year he had here a UFO convention, and he brought Dr. Hynek and all the famous UFO people, and
Greer.
No, not Dr. Greer. No.
Dr. Hynek was the professor, which was put in charge of the Blue Book. The American government wanted to find out the seriousness about the UFO. And Hynek did not want to do it, being a professor, even still in Illinois. And it's a kind of story. Finally convinced him, like John Mack later on from Harvard. And he followed the protocol and procedure, and he said, yes, do exist. After that was the end of his career, so to speak. And he came here and he spoke at great length about UFOs, abductions, etc., etc.
It was a big convention, and they would meet at the Orange House after the lectures. And one day I was sitting at the boutique, where the boutique area was down there, and the famous Man in Black appeared. And I just happened to be there. And they started, but I knew the literature, they started to ask questions. So they asked me, what's going on here? So I said, well, this is a yoga ashram. What are you doing here? Well, we teach proper exercise, proper breathing, proper diet, and so on. And they asked me more questions, then they lost interest and they left. But it was an interesting experience. This happened during this conference. And then Swamiji continued, and he did research also regarding near-death experience. He had connection with Dr. Moody. He did research about life between lives. I forgot the name of that person that he was bringing, a very famous person. Life between lives, then life after life. And in reality, there was almost no field under the sun that Swamiji was not interested in, that he did not research, that he didn't bring. And then, of course, he was interested in the connection between yoga and acupuncture. It means nadis and meridians, yoga and homeopathy, yoga and Ayurveda, yoga and peace. One year he had a symposium, Generals for Peace. He brought all of these generals. They sat on the floor and they were chanting Jai Ganesha, Jai Ganesha. And they were important generals. Harbottle from
General Harbottle.
General Harbottle and other generals sitting on the floor and chanting Jai Ganesha for peace. And He did so many things. So many. He actually was an example of his vision of unity and diversity. So that was Swamiji.
One last thing, as far as science goes, he was very interested in sustainability, and an experiment with his house was in the 1979 when he built the house, put solar in the house, was redirected the water, and had a permaculture. Brought the permaculture was just being introduced. He brought Bill Mollison to how to live sustainably. We're not going to be able to. The theme of being able to survive into the 21st century on level of peace and level of how we communicate with each other, health, and then also just in how we live and how we can live in a sustainable way. What's going to happen when we turn the electricity off, or we don't have the fossil fuels and this type of thing. So he was just visionary, but he was a practical visionary. He experimented.
That was a long answer. You have to speak louder. They don't hear your passion, is it?
Swami, would you tell us how you came this? I understand it was to translate the complete illustrated book of yoga. That's not true. Please clarify.